it's good to be here. I appreciate y'all having me. We tell you, see if I can get through this without crying. Okay. Now, a bunch of things we need to do real quick. Get this out of the way. As you know, my name is Curry Blake, and I know what you're thinking. It's what everybody thinks when they first see me. What are you laughing about? I hadn't said anything yet. I get it everywhere I go. Thought you'd be bigger. I just say what Wigglesworth always said. I'm 1,000 times bigger on the inside than I am on the outside. I am extremely I'm just glad to be here. Thank you. We're going to cover some things tonight. Normally we do training. First time in like this, we seldom get into training very much because we can't get into very much because we have to cut off in the middle. And normally in the training that we do, my commission from the Lord is to train people, average, everyday people, to heal the sick. The good thing about that is, to do that, we have to be able to demonstrate it. So, in that, first off, I want to say, because I don't know, how many of you have ever heard of me before? How many of you have ever heard of me before? Sid Roth, television, or any of that kind of stuff? Okay. So, say the majority of you really haven't. Okay. Well, I'll give you a real quick synopsis of why I'm here and what I'm doing and how I got here. Real quick. I don't like to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's my testimony, and people do get help from it, so that's why I share it. When I was 17 months old, I was at a family reunion, somehow slipped away from my parents, and they didn't know where I was at. Both my parents were very young. One was 16, one was 17. I was, well, at that time, they were actually 17 and 18. Anyway, I was 17 months old, slipped out of the house, got into the driveway. My dad didn't see me and backed out over me with a car. It was not the little cars you have today, it was the big old cars, okay, the big heavy cars. And when he hit me, he knew that he had done something. He got out and checked, and I was underneath the car, and he ran inside the house screaming, "I've killed our baby." And of course the entire family came out. I wasn't moving. The car, somehow I'd gotten caught in the wheel well, and it jerked me up into the car, inside the wheel well. It ripped my right ear completely off my scalp. It ripped my scalp from this ear all the way across the other ear and pulled all this skin down to my eyes. And my grandfather grabbed me, picked me up, picked up my ear, put me in his truck, and took me to the hospital. My mom was the only person there that believed in the power of God. And, amen. And the doctors told my mom, this was in September of 1960, I'll give you an idea how old I am. I'm 42, turned 42 April 1st of this year, so just so you won't spend all that time trying to figure it out. Okay? The doctor told my mom told my parents, my family, that just buy a casket, buy a plot of ground, and just get ready. There's no way I could live. There's no way I could survive it. Too much damage. Then they went to putting me back together. After about an hour and a half, well, when they went back in to start sewing me up, my mom went to praying and said, "God, he's our firstborn. and you got to let him live. I dedicate him to you. If you let him live, I'll raise him for you. I'll train him for you. After about an hour and a half, the doctor came out to take a break. He wasn't finished. He just had to take a break. And he said, well, it looks like he might actually live. But if he does, he will be a vegetable all of his life. He'll have such immense brain damage that he'll never be able to take care of himself. He'll never be able to clothe himself, feed himself, anything. You have to do it all. So it's actually better off if he dies. He went back in to finish the surgery. My mom went back to praying. I said, God, that's not good enough. If you're going to let him live, you got to let him be normal. Well, there's still controversy in my family over whether I'm normal or not. But when they get sick, who do you think they call? Then the doctors came back out a while later and said, well, we can't really find any signs of brain damage yet. He never went unconscious, so that's a good sign. And they said, but even if he does live and if he doesn't have brain damage, he will have no hearing in his right ear and he will have no hair. So you can see where this is going, right? Well, I've got perfect hearing in my right ear. I've had a full head of hair. Matter of fact, this is probably some of the shortest it's been, except when I was in the military. When I was growing up, my mom taught me how to read before I started school. I didn't go to kindergarten. She kept me home, taught me how to read using the Bible. I was about 7 years old before I learned that these and thous was not normal English. Okay? Instead of her reading me to sleep, I read her to sleep. That's the way we lived. I was an only child. My mother found out later that they could have no more children. And so I was, I guess you call it mama's baby. I mean, I was, after that accident, I was kept pretty close. For years after that, I would walk. Matter of fact, y'all probably heard of the town that I'm from originally, where I was born. It's called Jasper, Texas. Some notoriety now. I want to tell you that everybody there is not like that. Okay? Good people come out of that town. But the devil gets in some others. So, for years after that, though, we'd walk downtown across that square, and that doctor would be about 80 years old, and this would be 10, 15 years later, and he would cross that square and come over and grab me by the head and start looking to make sure that it kept. And I was thinking, if it's not healed by now, Doc, it ain't going to heal. Okay. So, I grew up. My dad was a police officer, and when I was 17 years old, I decided to follow in his footsteps. He had been in the U.S. Air Force as a security policeman. I decided to join. So I joined the Air Force, went in. I was enlisted as a security police law enforcement specialist. And while I was there, first time away from home, only child, I automatically went to my roots and started reading the little Bible that I picked up whenever I went in, and started reading all these things in it that I hadn't heard in the church I was going to. Started reading in there about laying hands on the sick, and raising the dead, and casting out devils, and all that kind of stuff. And none of that went on in my church. So I went to my chaplain and asked him, what about all this stuff? And he said, well, that all passed away. I said, well, where does it say that? Because I hadn't got to that part yet. He said, well, that's because you don't understand theology. So I decided I didn't really care much about theology. Still don't. It gets more in people's way than than most other things. Then I felt that the Lord was calling me to preach. I was under a guaranteed enlistment, 4 years. It's a horrible thing to realize you're called to preach. You got a 4-year enlistment somewhere and you can't just walk away from it. So I started praying and said, God, if you want me out of here, you got to get me out. I'm under a contract. If I leave, I go to prison. So you got to get me out. 3 days later, my commanding officer